Prepare to have your perception of the iconic Apollo mission shattered as we embark on a riveting exploration of the top 10 jaw-dropping secrets that NASA concealed from the world. Buckle up for a mind-bending journey through hidden lunar anomalies, mysterious transmissions, and covert astronaut encounters. Get ready to peel back the layers of secrecy and uncover the astonishing truths that NASA desperately tried to keep hidden. Getting to the moon was a fantastic achievement, and the technology was amazing. It also had the added complication of involving human beings. At the time, the astronauts and rocket engineers were often portrayed as almost superhuman. In reality, they were just as flawed as the rest of us, so not everything that happened fitted in with NASA's corporate image and public relations plan. Here are the top 10 facts about the Apollo mission that NASA wanted to keep secret. 1. Images of Playboy playmates were filmed to the moon. Alan Bean and Pete Conrad were about 2.5 hours into the second moonwalk of Apollo 12 when Bean turned to the next page of his checklist book. He saw something he was not expecting. On the one page was the usual list of tasks, but on the facing page was a topless young lady smiling up at him. To be precise, he was looking at a picture of Miss December 1968 from Playboy magazine. A caption had been added, "Don't forget, describe the protuberances." Conrad had one of his own, and each astronaut also found a second Playboy picture later in the checklist books. The additions had been made by Dave Scott, the backup commander, and the books also contained some cartoons by Ernie Reyes, head of NASA pre-flight operations. 2. An art installation was probably smuggled to the moon. Apollo 15 astronaut Dave Scott left behind a tiny metal statue called Fallen Astronaut, a memorial to the astronauts and cosmonauts who had died in the name of space exploration. However, we have to take the word of a mystery man that a second piece of art made it there. It goes by the name Moon Museum, and it traveled 250,000 miles without the knowledge of NASA. American sculptor Forrest Myers had the idea of sending a miniature art museum to the moon. He contacted NASA but got no response, so he decided to smuggle it there. He and 5 other well-known artists came up with designs that could be etched onto a tiny piece of ceramic. The most striking image was from Andy Warhol. 3. The bathroom facilities on Apollo spacecraft were less than ideal. On Apollo, they were taking a pee involved putting on a condom-style device and connecting this to a hose. The astronaut then opened a valve that sucked any urine directly out into the vacuum of space. Unfortunately, this system was far from leak-proof, but all the crews agreed it was better than the procedure for having a poop. This involved the delicately named fecal bag. Whenever a crew member needed to use one of these, the other 2 astronauts retreated as far away as possible. This wasn't very far. The command module was only 13 feet in diameter. The man doing the business then had to strip naked and attach the bag to his backside. Next, a finger was involved. Gravity plays quite an important role on Earth-based toilets, ensuring that the poop drops into the toilet bowl. In a weightless environment, things just sit there. 4. 3 bottles of brandy boarded Apollo 8. Apollo 8 began its journey back to Earth on Christmas Day. After a TV broadcast, the crew opened the locker to get their next meal. Instead of the usual tasteless space food, they found 3 foil pouches wrapped in green and red ribbons. They were labeled Merry Christmas. Inside each pouch was a Christmas dinner, including real turkey, gravy, and cranberry sauce. At this time, Apollo 8 was still at least 200,000 miles from home. There have been other Christmas dinners in space. It is a regular event on the International Space Station. However, Apollo 8 still holds the distance record by quite a margin. There was another treat for the astronauts in the locker: 3 miniature bottles of brandy. Frank Borman, the mission commander, took one look at them and ordered them to be put back unopened. 5. NASA lost an Apollo command module, and the Russians gave it back to them. During the summer of 1970, the United States icebreaker Southwind was cruising in the Arctic Ocean. In a rare thawing of Cold War relations, the ship made a courtesy visit to the Russian port of Murmansk. What followed was bizarre. 3 U.S. diplomats arrived to take part in a formal ceremony. Then the Russians handed over some American property. A conical object was hoisted on board the Southwind. Here, in the far north of Russia, was an Apollo command module with a NASA logo painted on the side. 6. Most Americans did not like spending billions on Apollo. In a speech to Congress on May 25, 1961, President Kennedy announced, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon. It was not a statement but a request for funding from Congress. Kennedy got the money approved, but many Americans did not agree with the idea. A Gallup poll soon after the speech showed 58% of the public opposed the plan. All through the 60s, public approval ratings for Project Apollo struggled. Only one poll, taken in July 1969, showed that more than half of Americans considered going to the moon was worth the expense, and that peak was just 53%. 7. Buzz Aldrin took Holy Communion on the moon. In the interval between establishing that it was safe to stay and starting preparations for the first moonwalk, Buzz Aldrin made an announcement. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask every person listening in, whoever and wherever they may be, to pause for a moment and contemplate the events of the past few hours and to give thanks in his or her way. This was followed by 30 seconds of radio silence. During this time, Buzz Aldrin opened a small plastic package containing communion bread and poured a tiny amount of wine from a miniature chalice into a cup. With Neil Armstrong standing quietly next to him, Buzz Aldrin took Holy Communion. The communion bread was the first food consumed on the moon. 8. Divers who opened capsules after splashdown had to be ready for a smell. Tiny airtight room, 3 men, 12 days, no shower. This is not a formula for fresh, sweet air. Luckily for the astronauts, the human mind adapts to whatever the background odor is. So even at the end of a long mission, the inside of a command module smelled fairly normal to them. It was a different matter for the divers of the recovery crew. Sometimes described as the worst job in the space program, the men opening the hatch had to brace themselves for a serious assault on their noses. Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders described the frogman poking his head in the hatch. 9. The Saturn V rocket designer left the USA accused of war crimes. Arthur Rudolph spent years working as Wernher von Braun's deputy. For much 1960s, he was the project director of the Saturn V program, overseeing the design and construction of the huge rocket. He retired on January 1, 1969, knowing his creation had taken men to the moon. Then, during the 1970s and 80s, his past caught up with him. Like von Braun, Rudolph had spent the Second World War developing the V-2 rocket for the Nazis. This took place at an underground site and used forced labor from a nearby concentration camp. It is estimated that at least 12,000 people died making V-2s, more than died as a result of them being fired, and people were willing to say that Arthur Rudolph was at least partially responsible for these deaths. 10. A high potassium diet on Apollo 16 caused a flatulence problem. Both Dave Scott and Jim Irwin suffered minor heart irregularities during Apollo 15. After their return, the problem was put down to a deficiency in potassium, so the astronauts on the next mission received lots of orange juice with added potassium to drink. This had a side effect that was vividly outlined by astronaut John Young. A microphone was inadvertently left on, and Young's problem was broadcast to the world. As we reluctantly reach the end of this mind-blowing journey through the hidden secrets of the Apollo mission, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The moon landing was not just a giant leap for mankind, but a tantalizing tapestry of untold stories and concealed truths. From covered experiments conducted on the lunar surface to undisclosed encounters with unidentified objects, the Apollo mission carries within it a veil of mystery that only deepens our curiosity. If you found our video informative, kindly subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on our videos.